Hello and welcome back to the Bird's Eye View podcast. I'm your host, Zach Worden, here with Jori Negin-Shecter after a couple weeks off. Jori, how was your trip away?
It was great. It was nice to soak in some sun, but I am very much ready to talk some Blue Jays baseball.
Did you miss the pod? You missed the Blue Jays while you were away in Aruba?
I would say I missed them about as much as Matt Chapel would miss a four-seam fastball middle.
So by quite a bit, I guess.
By quite a bit, I would say.
Well, in the time that you were away, a couple moves dropped. We caught up with Tyson Shushkowicz last week to kind of discuss it. But before we kind of get into some of the recent news, I just want to get your opinion on the Kevin Kiermaier, Isaiah Kiner-Falefa signings. How are you feeling about the Jays going back all in on defense?
Yeah, the Blue Jays are going to need to be excellent defensively. Because they are clearly doubling down on their plan to win every game 0 to -1. If that is sustainable, we will see. It sure didn't look sustainable last season, given the fact that they completely flamed out in the wildcard round. But I see the vision, but boy, is it just not a fun vision to be very privy to. I don't know, man. It wasn't fun baseball last year. That much has been abundantly clear. So to double down and go from Matt Chapman to IKF, which is a whole different issue in and of itself, is concerning. I don't know how much more. It's been a couple weeks, it's simmered. I think if you'd asked me the day of, I probably would have given you just an absolute tearing to shreds of Atkins and Shapiro, but that's a bit of a befuddling decision.
Yeah, we'll see what they do. Obviously, you can't judge the offseason until it's over. And if IKF is a bench piece and they add somebody to kind of take up the majority of the at-bats at third base, I think it's a decent move. Obviously, it's not great if you're going to let him be the main third baseman.
And the other issue, too, is if he is a bench piece, he's like the same bench piece that you already have. You have Schneider, who's probably the starting second baseman, but realistically is probably like a 105 WRC plus second baseman. You've got Biggio, you've got Espinal, you've got a guy like, Aurelvis Martinez is a little further away, but you've got him, you've got Addison Barger coming out. You've got a million middle infielders. Why are you adding a guy whose ceiling is lower than basically everybody in your farm system? It's just, there's a lot just of nonsensical stuff, which you talked about last week. It's a bit of a weird, awkward fit, but like, I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine.
Yeah, I mean, of course, the signing happens and you kind of try and get into the mind of Ross Atkins a little bit, and I think I can understand at least where I hate saying this, where it's like you kind of let him hand the position over to a prospect, you let them win the job. Sure, like that, I can be convinced by that. But at the same time, like you can't really be throwing away games in April and May, and when it's going to be a tight playoff race again, right? So
I mean, you talk about wanting to win the job. You gave IKF 2 years. Like, if you want to win the job, sure, but you still have another year of IKF after this year. So that one makes no sense. Kiermaier, I'm happy to bring back. I think it's a little bit of an awkward fit as well. You've already got Dalton Varsho. They literally spent the first half of the offseason being like, Dalton Varsho is our center fielder. So not really sure where this Kevin Kiermaier, allocation of resources comes from. Doesn't really make sense to me. Feel like, if it's not prohibitive, if, you can still go out and sign a guy like Jorge Soler, which we've heard the rumblings have continued to grow over the past, 48-ish hours, then sure, it's a nice, piece to have. Maybe he becomes like a fourth outfielder type if his bat falls off. But still, where's the fit there? Like, both of these signings are filling redundancies, which was a whole issue with this team last year, is that they were redundant as far as going all in on defense.
Yeah, I think I agree with kind of the concept where, they have like this really good pitching staff and this really good defense, but you can't expect the pitching staff to perform as well if you're losing a Matt Chapman and a Kevin Kiermaier behind them. So I agree, like the Kiermaier signing does make a little more sense as to where, they do have a lot of fly ball pitchers. So now you're kind of at least guaranteeing you're making sure that that outfield defense is going to be the same. And with IKF, who is his best defensive position is third base. So at least in this scenario where it's like you're at least guaranteeing that your pitching staff is going to have a better chance at repeating their 2023. So, it's obviously we're beating a dead horse at this point. There's been so much Kiermaier and IKF discussion. So let's kind of move on. I mean, recent days, arbitration deadlines, the Jays settled with every eligible player other than Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Obviously, Vladdy's the big news, but they overpay the MLB trade rumors predictions to pretty much everybody other than Trevor Richards, and then Danny Jansen and Nate Pearson got the projection. I mean, is there anything that you take away from any of those ARB signings at all?
I don't think there's any in particular. I would say the Danny Jansen saga continuing to kind of drag out doesn't really spell great news for the Blue Jays if they do intend to bring him back. We saw Keegan Matheson talk about it briefly on Twitter that the organization values him, the team values him, the players value him. He's a very important piece for the Blue Jays, injuries aside. So the fact that this ARB deadline, and I know that we'd heard earlier in the offseason from Scotty Mitchell that this wasn't really progressing, but to sign this ARB deal now kind of sets in stone that he's walking a free agency and you're going to have to make a play to re-sign him. Now, that shouldn't be a prohibitively expensive move to make, but it remains to be seen if the Blue Jays are willing to actually go out and do that.
Yeah, I mean, when we did our offseason projections, like I put in a Danny Jansen extension in there just because I don't think that you can trade Gabriel Moreno and then let Danny Jansen walk like two off seasons later. It's you're not leaving it to Alejandro Kirk, who, however you feel about him, right? Obviously, one of the better defensive catchers in baseball. It's his bat hasn't been there for his last like 700 plate appearances or whatever. So I think having like the Kirk Jano tandem is really valuable for the team, and I just don't see a world where you deal away Moreno and then immediately 3 seasons later are looking for a second catcher.
Yeah, and we even like talked about that, I feel like a couple of weeks ago, where if you're gonna deal Moreno, like what's the plan long term for your backstop? So is it a case of maybe they just didn't believe in Moreno as a catcher, but that doesn't make any sense. So there's a lot of inconsistencies, it kind of feels like right now. There's a lot of missing pieces, and Shohei Ohtani would have solved a lot of them, but because they didn't get him, this team is barreling towards some very, very uncertain future.
Yeah, I mean, I like what would you give Jansen? Like I think we've already talked about this a little bit. I gave him 439, which obviously bought out this ARB year, so that's not really in the consideration anymore. So basically that kind of comes out to 333 kind of now if you were to extend him, and he probably wants more years than that, right? So it's going to be a tough negotiation, I think. He probably will get the qualifying offer. I would imagine the catcher market
I,
is it's the catcher market is like pretty bad, and for him, I mean, he's a guy that probably just wants to lock in years, right?
Yeah, well, that's where the issue has to be, right? Because I think with him, he probably values himself. I would, if with no insider information, you'd have to guess he's somewhere in the 15 million ballpark, and the Jays are probably somewhere in the 10 million ballpark. And bridging that gap isn't insurmountable. The issue is that Jansen probably wants 5, 6, 7 years, and if you're the Blue Jays and he can't stay healthy, I'm not giving him more than two, I think. Maybe the third year, but even the third year with him uh, brings about certain risks that, like, how much do you really want to give Danny Jansen, who plays 70, 80, 90 games a year, 3 seasons guaranteed when you're basically getting a half a season from him, right? So there's going to be some give and pull here.
Yeah, he's about to be 29 too, so Like I feel pretty like yeah, I agree. Like I feel pretty good about his age 29, his age 30 and his age 31 years. Like I think that's okay to feel comfortable with. And then, once you're getting into 32, 32, 33, 34 for a catcher who, he hits the ball pretty hard, but it's not like he's a Vladimir Guerrero Jr. type like hard hit kind of guy, right? Like
No,
obviously
there's
he's a pull happy guy who, I guess that can age decently, but I would have a little concern there for sure.
it's he's not like a irreplaceable guy, but he's also extremely important to this team, which puts him in a bit of a weird, awkward spot. So
Yeah,
I
I mean
guess we'll
he's
see what
he's
they
he's
do.
worth way more to the Blue Jays than he is to probably anybody else, right?
Probably, yeah. Well, but the reason he's worth more to the Blue Jays is because they've dealt away the future and they need him now to be a guy. So it's like of their own doing.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I mean, we'll see how that progresses. I Do you think that they're more likely to wait until the offseason to try and get something done, or is that something that we could see in the coming months or kind of as a mid-season thing?
If I'm him, I think I would probably rather get it done before the season because we know he's going to get hurt again. I mean, it's been a pretty common refrain the whole time he's been with the Blue Jays. So if I'm the Blue Jays, I don't think that there's any real urgency to get the deal done. I think the urgency would be from his side, but also if he hits again like he has been, he's like a 125 WRC plus guy over 90 games. Like, by the end of the season, his cost projection doesn't really dramatically change, right? Obviously, he has a down year, things change because of the injury concerns. But if he either stays healthy and then maybe has like a 95 WRC plus season or has another 120 WRC plus season over maybe like 110 games, like he's sitting pretty and the Blue Jays are in trouble. So you kind of have to weigh how much the Blue Jays are willing to kind of bet on him almost like not being healthy. It's almost like contradictory, right? Where if he is hurt and bad, you don't bring him back. If he is hurt and good, you probably bring him back. If he is mediocre and healthy, you bring like the equation here doesn't really serve the Jays very well to sign him before at least like August.
Yeah. I think when you look at like any potential deals, I mean, obviously Wilson Contreras got five, like 88, right? So that's like 17 and a half AAV. And I'm sure that Danny Jansen and his camp are probably looking at that like, hey, like we can probably get something close to that, right? Because Contreras signed that at 30. So Jansen will be heading into his age 30 season. So if Jansen, you know, it's tough to say because like Contreras is good, but Jansen is also good. And
Yeah.
it's
But they're
like,
different. I wouldn't
yeah,
describe them as the same. I think Contreras, and maybe it's just brand name, but I think Contreras is probably not anymore, but I think he's probably a couple tiers higher
he
than
was he was crazy like the second half of the year after they had like all of their beef with where they, were like, oh, you're not a Cardinals catcher or whatever. But he was really good this year. And he was also really good last year heading into free agency.
Mhm.
So like we'll see. Like Contreras, so he came off a year where he had like a 132 WRC plus to get that contract. So yeah, like I could see Jansen like maybe not quite having like a 132 WRC plus, but maybe if he has like you
But
said,
over
like a
how many
one,
games? But
yeah,
over how
right,
many
yeah.
games,
So
right?
like if he has the Contreras only played 113 games that year, so like let's say Jansen goes 120 over 110,
Mhm.
then I think you could probably look at him as like a 4 year like eight, not 80, but a 4 year
$75
like
maybe.
16 AAV.
Yeah.
I
Which
don't
you're
know.
getting into some like it's going to be really compelling exactly where this goes. But the Jansen saga, I think, is the big takeaway from arbitration. Everyone else, more or less, pretty much how you expect it to. Kevin Biggio got, I feel like, pretty substantially more than his art projections, which is just so Blue Jays to be like, Kevin Biggio is our guy, and we're going to give him extra money because we just love him so much, which Like I was chatting with someone yesterday. Kevin Biggio is like the platonic ideal of a bench guy, and the Blue Jays are just like maybe right field, maybe first base, maybe third base, maybe second base. Like he's clearly like a guy that you can put out there, but no, nobody should like want this guy to be your everyday anywhere really.
Yeah. Like I get the second half stuff too, but like I mean we'll see. We'll see kind of how those improvements carry over to 2024. It's funny because like he did get the most over, like so he got 500K over his estimate or whatever. And then the next highest was Espinal, who got like
It's
220K over his
yeah,
estimate.
yeah. It's funny that it's the two guys that there's clearly a
Sorry, I guess Mesa got the second highest. Just looking at it here, Mesa was like almost 300 over.
yeah, but still the just to me it's there's something very funny about Espinal and Biggio, the two guys that the front office is like, we won't give up on you. And it's like they get the most kind of extra. It's like, of course they do.
Yeah, we'll see. It'll be interesting. I mean, obviously it's you know arbitration and it's very baseball minutia to kind of be like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, Kevin Biggio got 500K more than his MLB trade rumor estimate. What does it mean? But I
It
obviously
means it means the Blue Jays love him.
obviously the biggest takeaway from it all is of course Vladimir Guerrero Jr. not getting it done, similar to Bo Bichette a year ago. And so Vladdy's MLB trade rumors estimate was 20.4 million, and he ended up filing at 19.9, and the Jays file at 18.05. So, I mean, if you're the Jays, like I don't know, like Pete Alonso got 20, right? Like a little bit over 20 million in his settlement. Um, what do you think about the difference there in the 1805 and the 19.9?
I think the difference is not worth potentially just destroying your relationship with Vladdy. That's what I think the actual situation here is. Because if you go to arbitration with Vlad, it's over. Like, I know that there's the talk of, oh, it's a little awkward and, oh, guys settle for arbitration and then sign extensions. I think JTL Romuto is another example of a guy. But like no one has ever walked out of an arbitration meeting and been like, oh, that was productive and good, and we solved their differences. It's always like, wow, that's this organization hates me, and I am not worth as much as I thought they were to them, and they actually think I'm dog, and it's not great. And if you have any aspirations, and I get that Vladdy is coming off a horrific year, and I get that they are banking like you would not believe on an offensive resurgence from him. But if you have any aspirations at all of this team being a sustainable winner, as they've so deemed the term, you cannot lose Vladdy. You cannot lose Bo. They've salvaged, it sounds like, the relationship with Bo, signing that extension. And maybe the Jays just go 2 by 22 or 2 by 21 and just be done with it as far as arbitration goes and just try to avoid it altogether. But that million change or whatever it may be, you can't let that completely just ruin any relationship you have with Guerrero's camp.
So before we get into the extension talk, because I think it's worth having with Vladdy as well, just kind of like what would that look like, and is it even possible at this point? I want to know if you're, I mean, obviously I can't make the case to you for both sides, but if you're the arbiter of this case, which number are you going with? I think so. So I'll put it out there, like the Pete Alonso 120 thing makes me think that it'll like pretty likely be that Guerrero will win that case. But I mean, what do you think? Who
No,
is coming
well,
out on top?
but Pete Alonso has been like the definition of consistency, and Vlad has been the opposite of that. So to me, I feel like the Jays case is pretty strong if you're like looking at the last 2 years, right? Because he's been like fine, but as has been well discussed, he's not been that good. So I would think that their arbitration case is probably pretty strong. And also, if I recall correctly, you don't get to use StatCast numbers in your arbitration case, I think. I
Yeah,
know that
so
used to.
so yeah, so the way that it like the way that I understand it is that like the arbiters aren't like baseball people, like they're just, you know, not like they're just general lawyers or whatever. So if
Mhm.
you're going in there and you're being like, well, like I mean, whatever, like his WOBA was this, blah blah blah, like they're not really gonna
Yeah.
be up to date with that. So the more effective arguments are like based on like average home runs, just kind of, the more traditional baseball stats, let's call them.
Which Vlad has been not amazing
I
at.
mean, if he comes in, so he was like 264, 26 home runs, 94 RBI. This is where I'm kind of like I feel like maybe like the 19.9 will be a decent, I it'll be interesting. I think it's a really interesting case, and obviously it's funny because it's like $2 million basically.
Mhm.
But I don't know. I don't know which way that they would lean. It'll obviously depend on all the cases, and I laugh at all the Twitter memes basically where they're like, the Blue Jays running in with the video of him getting picked off at second
Yeah,
base for the
literally.
meeting. It's
It's
yeah. It'll be interesting. Like, I mean, the comparables, like, I mean, Pete Alonso is obviously the very easy one because he's like about the same experience level, and like there's been a lot of debates as to, like, who's the better first baseman, Vladdy or Pete, right? So like thinking of like other comparables like recently, I can't really think of like
there's not a lot of really strong ones, so I get the peak comparison. I just don't think that Vlad's going to be able to argue effectively because Alonso's been like a 35, 40 homer guy every year, right? He's consistently been, in that 100 RBI range. He's consistently been one of the best hitting first basemen. Vlad was exceptional, as we've very much discussed, and then he was awful, and then he was even worse than awful. So, like, that's not the same guy.
yeah. It's yeah. Like, I mean, we can do the extension stuff now. Like, you think it's likely that they do an extension to kind of avoid arbitration? I I think that's a really interesting, like, would be an interesting contract to negotiate as well, right? Because like that's probably where you kind of have to account for like his ARB jump next year as well. So like, is that like you're going to I don't even know, like 250 to you go 25 million and then that like because I guess that's probably a little much based on like because he was what 14 million last year,
Yeah,
20 million this year, so that's a 6 million jump. So like let's just say for the sake of the exercise that he jumps 6 million again next year, so it's like around 26, so like 20, so 45, but then you probably would want to do it because he probably earns about that much, so you probably want to do like 248.
maybe. I mean, it's going to be in that ballpark of like 250 with probably a couple of bucks knocked off. I think for the sake of clearing the air and keeping things mostly amicable, you kind of have to get him extended. But I also understand that to the Blue Jays, there's not exactly a ton of urgency beyond the relationship because I think if I'm the Blue Jays and you look at the season he just had, how scared are you really of losing this arbitration case?
I I honestly do. I honestly, to me, like it's so weird to me because it's like it's not even worth like trying to lose or like if you win the arbitration case, like, great. You just like you dumped on this franchise dude who you want to be like an MVP level player, and you're just in there and you're just like dumping on him to try and save 2 million bucks, and then it's like that. How much does that cost you long term with that relationship as well, right? Like it's just
Yeah.
crazy to me where it's like I know like yes, there's examples of like where people come back from ARB cases, blah blah blah, blah like whatever. But to me, it's like it's 2 million bucks. Like just I know MLB teams are incentivized as well to try and like save that money and like try and keep costs down at like whatever, right? But like I mean, it's like to me, that's something that you do over like your 24th guy, not your
Second, third,
second
fourth
guy,
guy.
right? Like it's just crazy to me that this is where it's at right now. And maybe it is because they have something in the pipeline like coming down because they know that they're going to be able to get something done. But I don't know. It's just it's really confusing to me that where we're at right now.
No, it's ugly. But even if you're Vlad, are you willing to sign a 2-year deal and walk right to free agency? Because with
Probably.
if I'm well, because if I'm him, what if I have a huge year and all of a sudden I'm in that 30 million range for arbitration again? What if I have a huge year and I'm like, you either extend me or I'm hitting the market, like a long term extension. Or maybe now he's like, I won't walk to free agency. I want the long term deal.
Yeah. Yeah, he could do that too and just be like, yeah, I'm you either give me the 10-year $300 million deal or we're going to arbitration this year, we're going to arbitration next year, and then
I'm out.
deal with it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's so interesting, like this window. Like it's obviously it's coming to a close. And like we were talking about it before we hit record, but there are so many guys that are coming up at the same time as Vlad and Bo because this is the window that they've planned, right? So they've got a lot of work to do in the next couple of years. Whether
Yeah.
it's finding a way to turn those into prospects that you like to try and establish your next window, or if it's getting these guys extended to try and at least have a little bit of a future or extend this window with them and try and I don't know, like it's really interesting. And I think we'll see. I actually, do you think that what happens with Vlad could be instructive of what happens in the future, like what happens with Vlad in the next
Well,
couple months?
like yes and no. I think that obviously yes, in terms of because if you extend him, that's your future right there. That's your like whatever Vlad does, that's your window. Sign him for 2 years, that's your window, and nothing really changes. You give him that massive extension, which would be out of nowhere. Uh, that's again the same thing. That's your window. If he goes to Arb, again, that's like I think that the question itself is a little bit self-fulfilling in terms of Vlad is your window. Vlad and Bo are your window, but we've got Bo. Bo is he signed that 3-year extension last year, just finished the first year, 2 years left. The contract is settled. And then he hits free agency, which by all accounts, he's expected to hit free agency. And then with Vlad, you're kind of in the same boat where you're looking at is he going to sign these 2 years? Are you going to lock him up for these 2 years and be done with arbitration? Or are you going to walk to arbitration each year? Or are you going to be scrambling to avoid it? So the question to me is less, is this their window? As much as it's, can the Blue Jays salvage this window?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I'm curious with the Bo extension because he got 333, right? How
Yeah.
much would have he gotten in ARB this year?
Oh, probably a lot more than $11 million.
Yeah. Well,
I guess for
I wonder if
him,
Vladdy sees that and is like, hey, like I'm not
yeah,
getting that.
I'm
I'm not
not costing
costing
myself
myself.
money.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting though with Bichette also because obviously last year he would have made dramatically less than the 11, and so he got that's a raise, but he's still. I mean, he's probably on the open market a 25 to $30 million player, right? Now, arbitration never really rewards guys for what they're truly worth. You talk about Juan Soto just broke the record, $31 million. I would sign Juan Soto for $31 million every day of the week and twice on Sundays, right? So he was never going to get what he was worth, and Vlad's not going to get what he's worth, although to maybe a lesser degree. But still, I don't know that Bichette necessarily left huge sums of money on the
Yeah.
table.
I would agree with that unless he were to win an MVP or whatever. But
Yeah,
then everybody's doing backflips and is very happy with the result there. Yeah, I mean it'll be interesting to see. I think it's one of those things where could go bad, could go good, could be somewhere in the middle. Like it's tough to really take much away from it until something tangible actually happens.
yeah. Right now, we're in a bit of a waiting pattern, a holding pattern, and things could change soon. But it really kind of feels like this is the window, which, I mean, if we want to talk about extending the window or affecting things, the Blue Jays potentially adding Jorge Soler would certainly help. but like, is he a guy that moves the needle? Again, it feels a lot like there's a holding pattern, and adding a DH like Soler, which is who the Blue Jays have been rumored on, to be in on. I don't know if that does anything even.
Yeah, it- hard to say. Like, I mean, they'll I don't the window conversations are so tough because it's really hard to evaluate like where they're at until you're there, basically, I guess.
And I also think it's possible to extend this window. Listen, Vlad and Bo aren't necessarily the stars that they were projected to be in some respects. Vlad is not Ronald Acuna, I don't think. Bo Bichette is not Frankie Lindor. You're not dealing with some of the top guys in the league, but they're both capable enough players to be centerpieces. So you can extend them and extend your window. But the clock is clearly ticking and they need to add.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder like how much the front office like is kind of looking at it and being like, well, if we really want to commit to these guys like into their 30s, like we need to be certain that they're going to be like playoff World Series contending type players, which obviously they haven't gotten to that point yet.
Not yet.
I'm interested. Like it's kind of funny. Like just total aside here, but I could 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 Vlad be Acuna? Like certainly, I would say as a hitter. Like you look at last year where Acuna had like one of the biggest discrepancies in WOBA and xWOBA, and then we saw that with Vlad this year. So like, could there be something there? Like, yeah, maybe. Obviously, they're totally different hitters, and Acuna just stopped striking out this year. So like it. We all know it's in there for Vlad. So it's like we've had this conversation way too many times. So I'm
Mhm.
not even gonna bother like saying it, but let's move on because there are some players who used to be Blue Jays and are not going to be Blue Jays anymore and have, as I would say some interesting deals. Teoscar Hernandez going to the Dodgers on the 1 year, 23.5 million, a
The
ton
super
deferred.
duper deferrals, as the Dodgers do.
Yep. Jordan Hicks going to San Francisco on a 444 deal to be a starter. Marcus Stroman joining the Yankees on what should be the most interesting player team fit in baseball.
The most toxic fit, I might add.
Like perhaps, maybe. Which deal are you the most interested in out of those three?
It's hard not to say Strowman just because the fireworks are going to follow. He's been a vocal critic of Garrett Cole. He obviously continues to have very strong Blue Jays connections. In the past, he's been like, I'm a big Mets guy, love the Mets because he played for the Mets. And then now he's like, I love the Yankees, played for the Yankees. And I don't think the Yankees fans are big fans of him. I think it's going to be very interesting to see. I don't know how receptive Yankees fans are going to be to someone as colorful as Stroman can be in terms of he is very animated, both
If he's
online
good,
and
they're gonna
offline.
love him. If
Oh,
he's
I
good,
don't
they're gonna
doubt
love
it.
him. If he's bad, they're gonna hate him, and it's gonna be a
Oh yeah,
disaster.
it's gonna be easily one of the most compelling storylines of the season in the AL East.
He's a good pitcher though. Like that's, obviously like the headline of the deal is like, oh, he's tweeted bad about the Yankees and whatever. But like, I mean, he's a good pitcher who I think probably slots in very nicely at Yankee Stadium. Obviously a big ground ball guy. So like nice fit. He's been in the AL East. He's had success there before. Before he was hurt last year, he was an all-star. He was probably the Cy Young front runner for a while last year.
For a
So
little bit, yeah.
yeah, so like a nice deal for the Yankees and that it, again, like the Yankees have gotten better this offseason.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about that. It's the question is if they've gotten good enough to be legitimately contending for a division crown, if they're going to be in the mix to make the playoffs. They probably are at that range at this point. I don't know exactly because with Stroman, their rotation was already pretty like set. No, it wasn't
I
great,
mean, like after they
but
dealt King, like I think what is it right now? It's Cole, Stroman, Rodon, Clark Schmidt, and
Cortez probably in
Cortez,
there.
Nestor, yeah, Nestor, the other one. So like, I mean, they're in the same boat as the Blue Jays, just on the pitching side, where they're betting on bounce backs from
Yeah.
Rodon and Cortez for
Mhm.
to kind of solve that rotation. And apparently, like, I don't know if this is like agents leveraging a little bit, but apparently they're still in the mix for Snell, which I don't know how much I believe that necessarily,
Yeah.
but
Snell's been really quiet, eh? I'm surprised there hasn't been more on Snell.
I thought he was going to be a Giant, like almost certainly. But
Yeah.
now the Giants are adding a new pitcher to their
Jordan
starting
Hicks to the
rotation.
mix.
We already knew that he wanted to be a starter. Like at last year in spring training, he's like, I want to be a starter. Like I haven't gotten a
Mhm.
fair shot at being a starter, whatever. So I actually don't mind the deal. Like, I mean, like 11 million per for a guy who you hope gives you the upside of like a three and like a best case scenario number two starter. Worst case, you have like maybe the most formidable eight, 9 inning duo in
Yeah.
Doval and Hicks. So like, I think it's a pretty safe deal from the Giants side. Obviously, you might have to like navigate a little bit of where Hicks would be upset like moving out of the rotation,
Yeah.
but other than that, like I mean, he's going to be great there. I would imagine
Well,
like
as a,
either way.
especially given the ballpark itself is
Yeah.
good as far as keeping the ball in the yard, and that was really kind of his issue in some respects. Uh, I would suspect with him the Giants are surely pleased. That much I can say. Uh, Here's where I think I would put it: is that the Blue Jays signed Yusei Kikuchi for 336 a couple off seasons ago. This deal, in a lot of respects, it's an extra year. It's 1 million less per year, so it's the same ballpark. Would you describe the Yusei Kikuchi signing at this point in time as a success? Because I think at this point in time, despite the horrific first year, his second year I think has made me feel a lot more comfortable about that deal. With Hicks, you're probably looking at the same thing. If you get like a 4 year array out of him as like your four starter, you're probably fine with that. It's not what you have in mind. But unlike Kikuchi, you've got the added upside of an $11 million back end of the bullpen reliever. He has demonstrated that he is worth that money in a bullpen role. So again, like you said, there's going to be some navigation as far as malcontent or anything of that sort. But I think that that deal should age fine regardless. Of course, pending his arm blowing up a second time, which changes the calculus.
Yeah. I like I think it's a good deal. Obviously, you know, I relievers are getting paid more than ever. Like Josh Hader's probably how is Josh Hader? Like I haven't heard a thing about Josh Hader this offseason.
No, he's also just kind of hanging
Like
around.
what is he gonna get? Because he
Blue
wanted to
Jays
be he
lurking in the weeds on a reliever here, as if
um could you imagine if they added Josh Hader?
that would be
Um
funny.
he wants to beat the Diaz contract, right? Like the 5/100 or what did Diaz get? Like
I
five
think he got
100 something
around. He
like
got
that.
around there.
And like how many teams are really paying that for relievers at this point?
Especially for because Diaz was coming off at like a historic year.
Diaz was 5/102.
Yeah, I don't think he's beaten that.
How much would you pay Felix Bautista tomorrow?
5,105.
It's so funny, like all these things where it's like the players and the agents where it's like, yeah, we just want to beat this contract. Like it's not really about the money. It's just about like beat like the
Yeah,
Soto thing, right? Where it's like, I
yeah,
just want to beat Otani and Hader, he's like he just wants to beat Diaz or like
yeah.
the Yamamoto negotiations in New York where the Yankees are like, we don't want to pay you more than Garrett Cole or whatever. So he's gonna go to the Dodgers because they are paying him more. But it's just funny like how negotiations play out like that.
Big egos, which to be fair makes sense. You know, if you're a major league ball player, you gotta have a couple screws. You gotta kind of have a little bit of an fu attitude.
Yeah.
So the ego thing makes some sense.
Let's do a Teo thing. He's gonna be like the Dodgers 8 hole hitter. It's gonna be
Yeah, that team's gonna be
he's gonna be
stacked.
like
I
six
don't
or
know if
seven,
Teo.
but
I don't know if Teo is actually good anymore. He struck out so much. Obviously, the power is self evident. Uh, we'll see if he is legitimately able to come back to where he was with the Blue Jays as a Silver Slugger. but still, the upside there is obvious for the Dodgers.
Yeah, I mean, like he's gonna get in there and he's just gonna swing. Like it's
Yeah,
gonna be great, and I'm sure that they are gonna help him. Right? Like their hitting coach is really good. Obviously, you got Mookie and Freddie in there. Like look what they did for JD last year. Right? Like
yeah,
it's
it'll
crazy.
be a fit. The fit will be there.
I
It's
mean,
the Dodgers. Anyone fits.
Dodger Stadium has like the second, or is it the biggest? Like the biggest park factor for right-handed hitters.
Yeah, he will
So
be just fine. He will
like
be just fine.
he's probably gonna hit 35 home runs.
Easily. He'll
Yeah.
probably hit 40 maybe.
Well, because he's going to get all the time in Coors, all the time at Dodger Stadium. I mean, I guess you get like Petco and what do they call the Giants Stadium anymore? Is
Is
it
it?
AT&T?
I think it's AT&T at this point.
Man, that's just sucks. The names, like Safeco, Candlestick. Like, come on.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess that was the football stadium. What was the Giants baseball field?
The Giants were. I don't remember. What was it? Has it been AT&T for a while?
It has been for a while.
We're having a
Oh, it's
stadium
it's
named. It's
Oracle
this.
now.
Oh, it's Oracle now. Sorry, it used to be AT&T.
Yeah.
We got to get our West Coast tech company correct.
Yeah.
Clearly,
Yeah, obviously. Rogers Center, the
the home
the
of
Sky
your
Dome.
Toronto Blue Jays.
Bring back the Sky Dome.
We could have a whole segment on stadium names.
We could, but let's not. Teoscar. Teoscar. I mean, as kind of like a potential, oh, man, it's funny because we had that conversation about like the deferrals and if it would become a part of baseball after the Otani thing.
Yeah,
And I
and
know a lot of people
didn't
were
take very
like,
long.
oh, that's not going to happen. But like, I mean, I think Teoscar is a perfect example, right? Where it's like he's a guy who wants to win. He's already made a decent amount of money in his major league career, and the Dodgers are just going to pay him like a little bit more than the market is valuing him at. And then he's like, yeah, I'll defer some of that to make that extra money.
Sure. Well, why wouldn't he? Right? It makes sense to. Uh,
Um, yeah, I mean, I like it's something that
there's
we'll
not.
see.
Yeah, there's not. We've complained and moaned and screamed about it, especially with the Otani case. Um, Funny enough, did you see that California legislators try to put
Yeah, I
a
did see
cap
that
in
actually.
place for deferred payments? So Shohei Otani literally rewriting the U.S. law as we speak.
I did see that.
But
Yeah,
it,
it's
it's
interesting.
concerning. It's interesting. It's a little concerning. We'll see how much of a factor it plays.
So let me throw this one at you. So yesterday there was a report by this guy who's like, you know, it's just the off season of like unnamed people throwing
Yeah.
stuff at the wall. But so like there's this guy who's like kind of in tune with like the Giants. I guess he had like the Robbie Ray thing before it happened.
Mhm.
And he tweeted out that the Giants upped their offer to Matt Chapman to 590.
Yes.
So if you're the Jays, like do you get involved there? If the most that he's getting offered right now is 590? Because we were thinking he was going to get like 150
Yeah.
over six or
Yeah.
something, right?
Yeah. We were thinking George Springer money.
Yeah. Like, would you do like 100 over five, 25 per?
Not even 25 per. 100 or 5
Oh,
is 20 per, which would be like to me
math.
would be I would be totally fine with that. But I don't know if I want to go 5 years with Matt Chapman. I just don't know if I can.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder if you're him. Like, is there a chance that he does like a 1 year deal, kind of like similar like Teoscar, and tries to establish more offensive value? I know like we've already had this conversation or a lot of people have this conversation where it's like, like why would you turn down like 120 million, right? Like how much more are you gonna get? But at this point, if he's only getting offered 90 million, then if he does
Yeah,
like a Teoscar thing, and he's like, yeah, I'll just sign a 1 year, $25 million deal and then come back next
yeah.
year or whatever.
Go play a course. Go hit a course for a year and go hit 45 bombs and then hit the market again. See where you go.
Oh man, the Rockies just getting involved, hey?
Could you imagine? Could you imagine if the Rockies just started doing that? They were like, "Hey, 1 year deal. We'll trade you at the deadline, and you just rake for the first half of the season."
The Rockies are like, yeah, we'll bring in Matt Chapman and Cody Bellinger, like,
Yeah, yeah,
whatever.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I feel like again, as far as like the market goes, like I don't mind a Chapman reunion.
I begrudgingly agree.
Yeah. It'll be interesting. I mean, obviously we can move on to Soler because obviously it sounds like he's approaching a decision. The Hector Gomez report that the Jays are willing to offer him a multi-year deal. Where are you at on the Soler thing?
I talked about it briefly before. Uh, I I like Soler as a concept, but he's a pure DH. So you're not getting like he is locked in your DH spot. And the Blue Jays have operated that Springer gets a couple and Kirk gets a couple and Vlad gets a couple. So it would be a pretty dramatic change in terms of philosophy. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing because I think that you can make a justification that your DH should be a bopper spot. It's not a take a rest spot, it's a go hit dinger spot. But it's so out of tune with the way the Blue Jays have operated that I would be pretty surprised if that is what came to pass.
I mean, I guess the other like rumors is like the Jock Peterson ness of it, right? Where they've been like negotiating with Jock Peterson, and that one like it fits a little cleaner because he's a lefty. He's only hitting against righties, so he's like got the big side platoon,
Yeah,
but he's probably not as good as Jorge Soler, right? And
probably
again,
not.
we talked about this before, where you're trying to fill the Brandon Belt role, and Brandon Belt had a 130 plus WRC plus last year, and it's going to be really tough to replace that value. So obviously, he was like 400 plate appearances against primarily right-handed pitching. So if you're bringing in Jock Peterson, like is Jock Peterson giving you that?
No, but also that's where it comes in where you're betting on Vlad Springer, Varsho bringing the floor up a little bit,
Yep.
right? So I think that they're realistically going to be sacrificing a little bit on Brandon Belt because Brandon Belt's year was not sustainable, as we've already said.
Where's
But
Brandon Belt
there's
signing?
his living room couch, probably. He's signing on MLB the Show with the Giants again, but he'll be using those thumbs more than anything resembling a baseball bat. I don't think that the Blue Jays are. How do I articulate this? They are not getting Brandon Belt's production next year. They're just not. But they are going to have to pray, which it seems like what they're doing, that everyone else is better because if they are not, they are an 84 win, 85 win team.
So I'm gonna throw this at you, and you're gonna give it back to me and tell me what you think.
Sure.
So we're gonna look. So Brandon Belt, he hit 14 home runs last year,
Mm-hmm.
right? But he had great on base and like ended up with a high WRC plus, right? So do you get more? It's this is interesting because obviously it's gonna go against like some stuff that I believe. But
Yeah.
so if you replace Brandon Belt, a 134 WRC plus guy, and you put Jorge Soler into that spot, who had a 126 WRC plus last year, but he hit 36 home runs and struck out a lot less, like 10% less than Brandon Belt. Does the value in like that, like 8 points of WRC plus, 8% of WRC plus, do you get that in like the potential for like some extra balls in play, some extra home runs? Like, does the difference get made up there in having Jorge Soler in the lineup against both righties and lefties, and where like just by the nature of baseball, him putting the ball in play more is going to result in like some more RBIs, some like sacrifice flies, moving guys over, like just kind of having the
Yeah.
ability of like the
It's
movement of the game, right?
yeah, and it's like a mathematical question where mathematically it's easy to say no, but in reality, sometimes sometimes your IKF hitting a fastball up your eyes into the dirt and Bruised Dark Gratterall is chucking the ball past in case you can't tell, we were checking out IKF's Statcast page before we hit record. But yeah, like the X Woba on that hit is bad, but it results in something good. So I think that in a lot of respects, you bring in the human element of baseball where a guy makes a mistake, a guy trying to track down a ball in left center field, and the center fielder's coming on, and there's a miscommunication and it drops for a double. By the very nature of things, that's not happening. Your X Woba on a swing and miss is zero every time, almost every time. In theory, I guess a drop third strike. your X Woba on a ball and play is always better than on a ball that you swing and miss at. So I do think that it is beneficial, even if it's not necessarily mathematically true. I think that there is a certain element that it does bring if a guy's going to be putting the ball in play as opposed to just swinging and missing 35% of the time.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of sometimes the 2023 Blue Jays would have loved to have a dude putting the ball in play a little bit
Yeah,
more, right? Like it's an interesting conversation. Like I think that there's a lot of value in the way that Soler performed the last couple of years and his 2023 projections. Like I mean, to me, he's the best fit. Obviously, he's a multi-year contract, so
mm-hmm.
like JD and Jock, those are 1 year deals. But
Yeah,
but to me, like I think you bring in Soler, like if he's healthy, he's a lock for to be a 30 home run guy.
easily. And you need
And
power. You need some bop.
yeah, so like to me, like I would do it. I think Jorge Soler is my number one choice. As far as the DH options go, like do you kind of have a preference between like the JDs, the Jocks, Soler? Who else is even still out there? Like I mean, like obviously Cody Bellinger, but he's not a
Not
DH
happening
type,
really.
right?
I think for me, had the Blue Jays gone at been big spenders, JD Martinez would have made a lot of sense to me. He raked last year. I wrote in my article, he's old and decrepit, but he still rakes. So I think he would have been my preference had the spending already happened. I think it would have been possible. But given that they're still sitting on a wad of cash, maybe. I think you have to probably make a bigger move than putting your eggs in a 37-year-old's basket that was fine the year before, raked with the Dodgers, big asterisk there, and then is moving on to not the Dodgers.
Yeah, I guess like Hoskins is in there as well. Like I like I I don't know. Like if I were to rank them, like I'd probably go like Soler, Hoskins, Jock.
Yeah, I think Hoskins
I
is
think
a
you're a
little bit
little more like
overlooked,
pro
but
JD than I am.
yeah, I mean he crushed the ball. He struck out like Brandon Belt. He did not walk like Brandon Belt, but he hit the ball like Vlad basically. So it's really a matter of how much do you believe that he can continue to rake? Because if he doesn't rake, then forget about him.
Yeah.
But if he continues to rake, he's a 25 home run guy for pretty cheap.
Yeah. I think JD is also very intriguing. I talked about this last episode with Tyson where JD obviously he has like the reputation of being a very smart hitter and has helped players like Mookie Betts and others and it's like a really big part and are very smart about hitting. And I do wonder if you bring him in like what kind of help that he could give to the Jays hitters. But I also, am worried about the Jays hitters like having too many cooks in the kitchen kind of thing. So
Yeah, I mean, we're already talking about an offensive coordinator and a hitting coach and a defensive coordinator, and there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen. I don't know if a player coach like JD Martinez provides all that much.
you sign him to a 1 year deal and you give him a transition to a coaching plan so
Yeah,
that
yeah.
he
You
takes
sign
over.
you sign him to play offensive coordinator assistant.
Exactly. Him and you think him and Don Mattingly would clash a little?
Maybe a little bit.
I don't know. JD's pretty good. So he's on the cover of Swing Kings. So you can't go wrong with that
Okay.
guy.
No, that's a good point. That's a good point.
All right. Well, is it kind of anything else from the latest of the Blue Jays from your vacation that you noticed where you're dying to talk and a little you're dying to talk Alejandro Kirk or anything like that?
You know what? As much as I'd love to say I am, I think I'm just ready for the Blue Jays to do something that doesn't involve Isaiah Kiner Falefa.
Yeah, hopefully in the next couple of days we'll get some news. We do have a exciting episode coming out next week. We will be joined by a Blue Jays prospect, so very excited for that. So stay tuned. That'll do it for us here today at the Bird's Eye View Podcast. Make sure you drop a follow, review, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on YouTube. Check us out there. Check out our Substack. We haven't put anything up there recently, but we certainly will as soon as the Blue Jays make some moves. So You can follow us all on Twitter. The pod is at BEV_pod. I'm at Worden_Zach. Jori is at J Negin-Shecter. And Jake, who is unfortunately not able to join us today, is at Jake Brannen_. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll catch you early next week.